Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to talk about Pedro Lopez. Some people know him better as the Monster of the Andes, um, mainly because he murdered a minimum of 110 young girls between 1969 and 1980. But he actually claimed to have killed more than 300 throughout Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru. Um, and there are some reports that say, unfortunately, he actually, among the over 300 that he claimed, majority of them were indigenous women, young indigenous women, um, since it's not uncommon in many countries uh, to have indigenous people, and especially indigenous women and children being kind of neglected by the government. So when these girls went missing, um, especially if they were indigenous girls, they seem to have been swept by the wayside and not focused on. Um, so like I said, he's known as the Monster of the Andes. He was born in 1948, so he was about 22 when around the time that he started his killings. Um, and according to one interviewer's story, Lopez actually led police when he was finally arrested, led police to 53 graves of girls between the ages of 9 and 12, which is amazingly unfortunate. Um, and in 1983, he was convicted of 110 murders in Ecuador and confessed to 240 more in Peru and Colombia. Ultimately, he was released from a Colombian asylum in 1998, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So according to Lopez, when he was being interviewed, they asked him, what was your childhood like, and kind of figuring out his background. He apparently, unfortunately, witnessed a lot of acts of prostitution by his mother growing up. And that really had a disturbing effect on his psychiatric health. And his father was not in the picture. He was unfortunately murdered when Lopez was about 6 months old. And his mother, within all of this time, his mother said that they had a good, loving relationship, but Lopez said that she was physically and emotionally abusive towards him. And because of some of the trauma that he experienced, his mom actually ended up catching him fondling his younger sister in 1957. So he was about 9 years old at the time, or 8 or 9 years old, and he was kicked out of the family home. And he was the seventh among 13 children total. And now this is an assumption, but because I don't know if there's a guarantee that all the children had both same parents, because as I said, his mother was a prostitute and his dad died when he was young. So the ones younger than him were more than likely half siblings, but again, that's just an assumption. And apparently growing up, he was a pretty polite boy, and wanted to be a teacher. But following his mom kicking him out after he was caught fondling his sister, he actually fled to Bogota, Colombia, which is Colombia's capital city. And then soon after, he was actually abducted by a man and unfortunately raped. So around the age of 12, he actually was taken in by a U.S. immigrant family, and they paid for him to go to school at a school for orphans. About 2 years later, so he would have been around 14 at the time, he actually ran away from the school. There's some claims that he ran away with with one of his teachers. There's other claims that he ran away because he was being molested by that teacher. So there's a couple different claims, but the biggest thing is he ultimately did run away from the school. And around that time, Lopez was arrested for a car theft, and he claimed that while he was incarcerated, he was actually brutally gang raped. And while he was still in prison, he actually hunted down the leader of the group of men that raped him and killed him. And only got about an additional 2 years added onto that sentence because he killed them. And then after he was released from prison, after he was done serving that sentence, he moved to Peru and started murdering young girls. So, and he claims that by 1978, he had already killed over 100 girls before being caught and captured by an indigenous tribe in Peru. And they were actually, the indigenous tribe was actually prepared to execute him for those crimes. But the U.S. intervened and persuaded them to hand him over to state police. But unfortunately, when they did that, state police quickly released him. From what I read, they didn't seem to have enough evidence to really hold him on the number of murders or anything like that, so they ended up having to release him. And so Lopez, after his release from state custody, he returned to Colombia and later moved to Ecuador. And during that period, he claimed to have been killing about three girls a week. And he's actually quoted in saying, "I like the girls from Ecuador. They're gentle and trusting. They're more innocent," which is kind of horrific when you think about it. Like, never heard somebody say that about girls from somewhere, but that's just me. So Pedro was finally arrested in 1980 after an attempted abduction failed, and he was actually in a market, like a public market area, and he tried to run, but he was actually trapped by some of the vendors and ultimately taken into custody. And he confessed to 103 murders, including the 53 body murders where the bodies were found of the girls. And in January of 1981, he actually was convicted of 3 murders. And he confessed to 300 sexual assaults and stranglings. And the police really only believe this because a flash flood actually uncovered a mass grave that had many of his victims. And he was initially charged with 16 years, which was the max sentence in Ecuador. But he was released, so he would have gotten out in 1996. He was ultimately released in 1994 because of good behavior. And so, but then he was arrested again for illegally trying to cross the border into the U.S. And in 1995, he was put on trial in Colombia. So he was originally, the 16 years was in Ecuador. In 1995, he was put on trial in Colombia for murder, but was ultimately found insane and sent to a mental asylum until 1998, so for 3 years. And then in 1998, he was tested again by a psychiatrist or psychologist, one of their high up psychiatric team members, and was found sane at that point. And bail was posted for him for $50, which was paid. So he was out on bail, and he was required to report to the police monthly to do like monthly check-ins. So it's, I guess, kind of a similar idea to here in the States, where if you get out, you have to do like check-ins and meetings with your parole officer, depending on your charges, every so often and everything, to make sure that you're doing good. He had that same sort of requirement, but as you can probably guess, didn't do it. He essentially disappeared in 1998 after he got out of the asylum. And as of right now, nobody knows his exact whereabouts. There have been claims that he's been all over South America, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil. There's claims that he's been cited kind of everywhere. And in 2002, again, since nobody really knows where he is, the Colombian government actually launched an order of arrest with Interpol. So this is essentially, if you see him and he's in custody, or if you see him and you know that it's him, you essentially have to arrest him. And then he, from my understanding, will be then sent back to Colombia to face the criminal charges that he has to face. So this one was a little bit of a quick one. I couldn't find a ton of information about him, about Pedro, but I thought he's a criminal that a lot of people know, mainly by his nickname, the Monster of the Andes, and the fact that he essentially disappeared. Nobody knows exactly where he is, as of the last that I heard, as of my research for this video. Which would be very interesting to know if he's still alive and where is he, because he's, as of right now, about 74 years old. So I would be amazed if he's still on the run, still alive and still on the run and still managing to evade everybody. But if anybody has any questions or anything, or any suggestions for future videos, leave it down in the comments. See you guys later.